by Bandwagon Radio and the On Channel, where entertainment news, current events, and much more is corresponding for the masses. Not only can you hear her, you can watch this beauty weekly on Mondays with MsMedia.
Welcome to Mondays with MsMedia. I'm your host, Celeste Mose, MsMedia. Today's guest is a virtual guest. I am joined via Zoom by Rupa Cunninghame. How are you today, beautiful?
Good, thank you for having me.
Of course. I could not have done this series by myself. I know we've talked about it quite a bit, and I just refused to do anything other than research without your assistance, so thank you for jumping on with me today.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like we talked about, this is a conversation that you and I had that we're not claiming to be experts or anything, and we're really here to just talk.
Yep. So I love that you made that point. Rupa and myself are not by any means any kind of experts on narcissism. We've just been doing a lot of research. I've actually received a very close to heart story from one of my viewers, from which I'll be getting about 10% of this narcissism glossary experience from. The other 90% will be straight hard research coming from a clinical psychologist by the name of Dr. Ramani Darvasula. So thank you so much for making that point. Let's jump right in. Today's topic is gaslighting. A lot of people wonder where the term gaslighting comes from. There was a play made in the 1930s that was turned into a movie, and the premise of the movie essentially was as follows. The husband of the wife, they got married relatively soon, really quick engagement, and during the marriage there were times where she thought, is the gaslight being turned up and down throughout the day, throughout the night? And she would ask her husband if this was happening, and he would deny it, even though he was the one that was manipulating the gaslight within the home. So that really essentially is where the term comes from. Rupa, what explanation do you have of gaslighting just on an everyday basis?
The gaslighting I've experienced is things like minimizing my experience or minimizing something that we know is true. Mm-hmm. And for example, for like the sky is blue, and the narcissist is going to say, no, it's not.
Yep.
You can show a photo, show the news, or anything else. Gaslighting to me was just like diverting the definition of gaslighting, just like the movie.
Yeah.
He was messing with the lights, and she was trying to point that out, and you're the one who's made to seem like you're crazy when you're not.
Yeah. You're made to seem like you're crazy when you're not. I really think is the best black and white explanation of gaslighting. An example of gaslighting, just interaction with someone day to day. I'm sorry you feel that way, right? You tell someone how you're feeling, what your experience has been, and instead of them taking a direct level of ownership, it's almost as if it's being thrown back at you, and it's, I'm sorry that you chose to feel that way.
Absolutely.
I think you're being too sensitive.
Yes.
That's one of my personal favorites. That never happened. Just complete and utter denial that an event, a conversation, a made promise never took place. I'll pause right there. You look like you have something to say about that, Rupa.
No, I'm following. You're absolutely correct. As you list your examples, I'm going into my head and being like, oh, that happened to me, or I have an example of that also. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's interesting, when I watched a lot of Dr. Ramani's videos, and again, today's term in our Narcissism Glossary series is gaslighting. Our intention is to go down the line and really kind of break apart a lot of the terms that we talk about on a day-to-day basis. Narcissist being the first one. As soon as someone cuts you off on the road, you're like, oh, what a narcissist. Or as soon as someone jumps in front of you in line or dare someone happen to be firm about wanting the color blue sweatshirt as opposed to red. Now you're claiming they're a narcissist. That is not what true narcissism is. Standing up for yourself or even being vain to some degree is not true narcissism. We're going to dig a little deeper into what narcissism is. So gaslighting is definitely 100% mental and emotional abuse.
Yes.
When you think about what gaslighting is, it's throwing you into a space of confusion by where you're questioning your reality.
Correct.
So if we look at this from a romantic setting, and I think we probably will do a lot of talking throughout this series in regards to familial settings, which means family. I know I made that sound like I had 17 L's. Romantic, and even workplace. Unfortunately, a lot of us, our first narcissistic relationship happened in the workplace. I know for me, I had am I going to say his name on TV? No, I'm not. I don't want to get sued. I had a manager when I worked in a large staffing company, staffing agency, and he was my client, essentially. He was a supervisor on second shift, I believe, for the employees that I managed. And he was just not a nice guy. Gosh, he was not a nice guy. He made my entire time working for that company pure and utter hell. I remember one day he sent an email, and in the email it was all in all caps. All of the words were in caps, and it was exclamation point at the end of everything. And I responded to the email. I don't think I responded. I went downstairs. This was back before I was quite as graceful. And I was with the smoke, as the kids so to say. I was with the smoke. So I left my office. I walked all the way downstairs across the power plant to ask him, hey, why does it seem like when you're emailing, it feels like you're yelling at me? And his response was, I am. Just I am.
Unapologetic.
Unapologetic. This guy was almost twice my age. Just there was no reason, to be that mean and that nasty. And because he had so much tenure with the company, there was no one to complain to. There was no reason to complain. I just kind of had to grin and bear it. I'll pause
Absolutely.
there.
All about control.
All about control. What experiences
Absolutely.
have you had on the workplace? Let's look at workplace for a second. What experiences have you had on the workplace that look anything like what I've just described?
I mean, I haven't experienced narcissistic behavior like I have in my personal life,
Gotcha.
in my family life.
Gotcha.
And also I think mine is unique. And when we listen to Dr. Ramani, it's not that unique. Mine wasn't also even a romantic relationship. Mine was family. But as I hear you describe this in a workplace, and you describe the narcissist not being able to let go of control,
Mm-hmm.
or the demands,
Yeah.
or also sending an email in order to make you engage. Those are the kind
Yeah.
of things you're going to see.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you keep talking about it, there's going to be times where you engaged to have accountability,
Mm-hmm.
and you were dismissed or ignored or gaslighted. What are you talking about, Celeste? I didn't mean it that way. I don't understand why you see it that way. Another projection. Like, you are the confrontational one.
Yeah.
I just sent an email. It's not my fault how you received it. But these are things when they keep going on,
Yeah.
there's a pattern.
Yep.
It defines your relationship.
Absolutely.
It's toxic.
Absolutely.
These are the things that go back to your point earlier. People like to throw that word around, narcissist.
Yeah.
You will know when you're dealing with an actual narcissist.
Agreed. I'm happy to hear that you haven't had any difficult relationships to that degree from a professional standpoint. It's actually really difficult to soar and to reach any level of greatness, especially again when your first level of contact can be so tumultuous. So I'm glad that you didn't have that, but my heart goes out to you to hear that it was in such a direct setting of a family member, and we're going to get deeper into that. Other forms of gaslighting, especially looking at a romantic relationship. An example of that would be withholding of communication or affection. That is gaslighting. Let me break that down for you. If you're in a romantic relationship, you've got absolutely every right to expect affection and communication from your partner. In the moments that those things are taken off the table as way to evoke a different behavior out of you, one that's more in line with what that person is looking for, that is your emotions being manipulated, informed, being gaslighted. Another example is the silent treatment. The silent treatment is one, Rupa, that I gotta be honest with you, if I ever came in contact with someone romantically and I could tell that they had these narcissistic traits and they gave me the silent treatment, that would be my out. I think that would be it for me. Because that's such a slap in the face for someone to not respect you enough as to respond to a text or a phone call or to keep with the regularity of communication that you've grown to experience in that relationship. Another example is contradicting. Someone telling you that what you experienced never happened. Rupa, what examples do you have of that?
There are so many examples of, contradicting, projection.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wanted to go back to something you said that I feel like is very important.
Mm-hmm.
The silent treatment, the withholding of compassion, withholding funds, things like this. It comes down to what we discussed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's a form of control.
Absolutely.
If you have an opinion,
Mm-hmm.
if you have to express a valid emotion,
Yeah.
if it's anything against what the narcissist wants, what they have control over,
Right.
whether it's isolation, silent treatment, everything, it's going to come down to two things: control,
Yeah.
and no accountability. They're never going to let go of control, and they're never going to have accountability.
It's really daunting. Research for this series was derived from the studies, again, of Dr. Ramani. There's actually a deeply troubling story that one of my viewers gave me. She reached out to me in season 1 after I did the episode on narcissism. And I'll say, after we tried to touch on narcissism in season 1 of Mondays with MsMedia, to do one episode does it no justice. And I realized that once I nibbled at it, I was like, wow, this is really more of a big, huge bite than a nibble. She connected with guest recording artist Sherry B and really appreciated the story that Sherry B had. And I'm actually going to be inserting Sherry B's video, Incubus, throughout the series, because the video and the premise of the song really does support being in a really difficult relationship that's difficult to get out of. Because my viewers' experiences went so deep, I promised to spend more than just one episode, and that's why we're doing this series. So she wanted to speak with me off camera. She's given me full rights to use her story, which I appreciate, but we will not be using her name. Before I get into the story, I definitely want to make sure that if the viewers have children that are watching, perhaps you send them out of the room. There was one evening that she was asleep, and she knew that she had put both of her cell phones and her iPad on the chargers on a nightstand next to her bed. And her boyfriend was sleeping beside her as far as she knew. Middle of the night, something just woke her up. She just woke up, and the room was pitch black, as she liked to keep it as dark as possible, but he wasn't in the bed. And she looked over on the side of the bed, and he was, kind of scrunched over on the floor, hurtled over on all fours, looking through her cell phone. And it looked like he was taking photos of what he was finding in her phone with his phone. When she asked him what was going on, she heard a sound, and I guess that was him sliding the phone under the table, trying to get her to believe that it was never on the charger. Perhaps it just fell behind the desk in the middle of the night. Because she's someone who believes that hitting things on head on, she got up, opened her cell phone, turned on the light, and said, hey, let's have a conversation. What is it that you're looking for? Let's talk about it. And in that moment, he looked at her and not only said there was nothing to discuss, but denied being in the cell phone. She saw him, but he said he didn't do it. Rupa, have you had a situation like that where, I think you have. In the beginning of this episode, I said something very minutely and you grabbed onto it and you were like, no, that is what happens. There is a questioning of your reality. When has that happened to you?
For me, the questioning of my reality is an ongoing thing. And one thing to say, what you just described, I think is also very important. It goes both ways. It's going to, the narcissist is going to say, you didn't see, hear what you think you saw and heard.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be the opposite, and you said A, B, and C, when you're like, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't say that. Or you get accused of saying things. Again, this goes back to one of the key things I think will differentiate a person who's arguing or in a funny, or any kind of relationship, any weird, any kind of confrontational thing versus a narcissist. The narcissist is going to find one way or another to be the victim. So in your, the interviewer's, the person that you interviewed's case, he's going to turn around and be like, I never had the phone. How dare you accuse me? You're making this up.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
Yeah.
And these aren't, when you say, have you experienced it? These aren't one or two experiences.
Yeah.
These are ongoing again and again, years long, that you're going to see things like this happen.
It's
and
crazy.
It definitely makes you question what is going on.
You just made a really good point. You touched on it in the beginning of the episode, deflection, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of deflection that she experienced that evening. I think that fight went on for a few hours into the morning. Instead of wanting to take accountability for being in the phone, a couple days later, she noted that he brought up something that he saw in the phone, but wouldn't acknowledge how he got the data. And so this kind of behavior was, it sounds really childish and it really sounds silly to hear it. But when you think about the fact that you're spending a life with someone and planning a life and planning to share a life with someone, and there's these moments where you're not sure if you're crazy or if they're crazy, it's really disheartening and really difficult to find your place there and your footing. I'll pause there. Rupa, what points do you have to that?
I think us having this conversation right now, we can't stress the severity of constantly having to second guess your reality.
Yeah.
When you're constantly called a liar, when you're constantly told that you're wrong or something didn't happen the way you saw it, this has a huge rippling effect in all parts of your life.
It does.
And it's very, very, not only just stressful, but it makes you, what's wrong with me? Maybe this person is right. But it's so important when dealing with a narcissist to hear these conversations, hear the YouTube videos by Dr. Ramani, to read up about this, because these are all signals that there is a huge problem that needs to be addressed before you have a breakdown or you can't function because you're constantly questioning yourself or your self-esteem. It affects everything.
I hate to even jump ahead of myself in this series, and I'm about to get into acknowledgement, because essentially what you're talking about is when someone deflects so magnanimously, when you've got such hard proof on something, that's dehumanizing as hell, right? You go from feeling like this to this, because to your point, it's, okay, is there something wrong with me? Is it me? Am I going crazy? Because why would someone logically behave like this? What you're referring to is being acknowledged. And acknowledgement is a basic human need. Like when we think about the 5 love languages, and everybody has their love languages, we're all over the place right with that. Everyone as a human being wants to feel acknowledged. And in a narcissistic relationship, that's actually not going to happen. It is one of the most paralyzing, dehumanizing relationships that you'll have to deal with. Another thing victims have been noted was being gaslighted by proxy and tribune. Now, what that means, an example of that would be, your mom didn't really mean that. Your dad and your mom are talking to you, and your mom says something, gosh, you could have bought me a bigger gift than that. All this money you're making, that's the best you thought to do. It breaks your heart. And you go and you confide in your dad, and your dad says, she didn't mean it. That's when you're now being gaslighted by proxy and tribe, to where you're not even having to be gaslighted by the initial narcissist. You're being gaslighted by their flying monkeys, which is a term we will be tackling in our next episode. These tribe gaslighters are often the family, co-workers, and friends of the narcissist. And why it's so easy for them to kind of jump on board is because they're seeing the very best of this person, right? They're not seeing the way this person comes home and completely ignores you during dinner. They're not seeing the way this person has hidden money from you even though the mortgage is past due. They're not seeing the way this person has pushed you, you've fallen on the ground, and then they've said, I didn't touch you. They don't see this stuff. They just see a relationship, and they see someone who's putting on their best face, and so it's easy for them to kind of be the flying monkeys. What experience have you had with that? I know you've got some. I know you probably have some very heartbreaking experiences, because I can't imagine a family member being a flying monkey, right? That's where you go for solace. Go ahead.
When you start to realize that there's a problem, and that problem isn't you, and the closer people with you start to see it, you are going to become enemy number one.
Say that
There
again.
is going to be
Say
a
that again.
character assassination.
Yeah.
Like you've never experienced before. Once, again, we're going to use the word control. Once the narcissist can't control you or the situation,
Yeah.
and you're starting to call things out the way you see them, they're going to start to take your circle, your family members and other people, and start to, behind your back usually,
Isolate you.
Absolutely. They're going to lie.
Yeah.
They're going to play that victim.
Yeah.
There's going to be no accountability. There's going to be projection.
Yeah.
And absolutely, they're going to, before you even know that everyone has a different side of the story and a false narrative repetitively given to them, it's really too late.
That's
And it
true.
goes to the flying monkey or fear. Especially in a workplace, a narcissist will thrive because there's fear. Again, this is so broad, and there's so many examples, and we literally just have to dissect as we go.
Yeah.
But control and use. Not only deflect, but you are never going to get empathy from a narcissist. You're never going to get decency from a narcissist. There's no limit for them to go. They're going to go to any limit. There's no limit for them on how much they're going to lie or criticize or project or create a false narrative or do any of it.
Yeah.
Another thing that you said, there was just so much. There was so much good information there that I should actually start noting it down. But before you even know what's going on, you are going to be discussed as the crazy person.
Oh, yeah.
Versus the narcissist, because you see them for who they are. I'm sorry, I just recalled what you said. When people are going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about, or I don't see it, it's because a narcissist is very, very good at presenting a persona. There's very few people that are going to see the narcissist for who they are, because the narcissist doesn't want control over them at the level they want control over you.
Woo! You better speak on that, girl.
But it's still all about control. They're going to control their image. They're going to control what other people hear.
Right.
They're going to control what they say.
Right.
There's going to be, if you ever hear a narcissistic person speak, it's like an act. There is a dialogue that is created, and they don't stray from that dialogue. It's like a broken record.
You're right about that.
And it goes on and on and on. And again, people can't see past what they've been presented, and that is why the victim actually gets victimized over and over and over again.
I actually had this conversation just with a family member, and I kind of got gaslighted just by talking about it. And I was talking about the experience of FKA Twigs while dating Shia LaBeouf, and how devastating it was really to watch that interview, which I thought Gayle King did a remarkable job with. I'm not always a fan of my brother and sister journalists out there, but kudos to her for that interview. I thought she did a great job of accepting feedback and accepting the slap on the wrist that FK gave her when the question was, why didn't you just leave? And FKA Twigs' response was, I think it's important that we stop asking victims of any kind of abuse survivorship, why didn't they just leave? The real question has to be, why did the perpetrator do what they did? We've got to change the narrative of who we're questioning. And I thought what was so great about that interview, even while, my heart breaking because I've always been a fan of Shia's, you have to separate the person from what they're being accused of.
Victimization, self-victimization, projection, gaslighting, and things like it sums up everything. And that was how you and I started talking about this, because we thought that interview was so good.
Yeah.
And someone speaking out about how narcissistic people are behind closed doors. And that, I think, is very, very key.
The interview with Gayle King and FKA Twigs was groundbreaking for narcissism, to say the least. When we return, we'll talk about common mistakes we make when dealing with difficult people, how to overcome these responses, and more. We'll be right back.
MsMedia, brought to you by Bandwagon Radio and the On Channel, where entertainment news, current events, and much more is corresponded for the masses. Not only can you hear her, you can watch this beauty weekly on Mondays with MsMedia.
Welcome back to Mondays with MsMedia. I'm your host, Celeste Mosaic, MsMedia, joined today with Rupa Cunninghame as a virtual guest, and the conversation is narcissism, gaslighting. The common mistake that we make when dealing with someone who is a difficult personality, or coined as a narcissist, is wanting to defend ourselves. We essentially think that, like the viewer I was discussing, you start taking screenshots and pictures and audio recordings of yourself so that when you come into a moment with that person, you're not so emotionally fragile because you've got a level of defense in your mind. That's a mistake. The reason that Dr. Ramani says defending yourself is such a mistake is because it exerts so much energy, right? You're taking your energy away from everything else that's good in your life, your job, your family, your exercise, whatever those things are, and you're focusing on trying to figure out this incredibly confusing relationship that you're never going to find a resolve for. My viewer got to the space where she was screenshotting images. There was a time where she caught him in the act. And instead of him just admitting what was going on, he threw it back at her. She said, hey, I saw in your email that you had gotten an email from a girl that you used to date. His response to her was, well, I heard that when you were at a party last week, you spoke a little too long to some guy who I don't know. She didn't remember speaking to a guy. She's sitting there in her mind going back and forth like, okay, who's the guy? Like, who is the guy? Because she was wanting to have a defense against what she's being accused of. And the reality is, does that matter? Because if he really had an issue with you talking about a guy or talking to a guy at a party that happened a week ago, he would have brought it up a week ago. It's being brought up now in this moment as a point of deflection. That was actually something that we talked about a little bit earlier in the show. It's really essentially the idea of a child getting caught with their hand in a cookie jar. You walk in the room, turn the lights on, their hand is dead in that cookie jar. They've got the crumbs all up under their fingernails. And what are you doing? Nothing. Your hand's in the cookie jar. No, it isn't. Rupa, what examples do you have of that?
When you were just talking about her catching him in the act and him turning around, I feel like narcissists, from my experience, particularly my narcissist, will keep score. There will, again, this goes back to key terms. There will never be any accountability from the narcissist about anything that they do, because they're going to bring up something that happened or create something that didn't happen in order to make what they're doing okay. There's always this element of punishment.
Wow.
In my experience, yes. So one of the key things that separate a regular toxic relationship from a narcissistic relationship is the level of punishment that the narcissist is going to feel entitled to deal out over things that either have happened and you thought you guys were past it, or honestly, in my experience, things that never happened would be used as a source of punishment, as a reason to punish. And another thing from regular toxic relationships to a narcissist relationship is the infliction of damage. When you're in a toxic relationship with someone, there is this level of, I want to be right, you can't be right, I want to be right, and a back and forth type thing. But there's still some decency there, or empathy there, or wanting to work something out. In a narcissistic relationship, you're going to not experience any empathy. You're going to experience someone who wants to inflict damage, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical. And again, with mine was a family member, but in other situations, like in a work place, someone who's going to want to make you lose your job, or sexual abuse. There's all types of and forms of punishment, but that element's always there. It's very, very upsetting. In my case, my punishment was not only dealt out to me, it was dealt to my children. And that's what made me draw the line. When my children started to experience the narcissistic, toxic relationship, and it went from just me to my children, and my husband, that's where I ended up starting to draw the line. And I realized letting things go, making excuses for his behavior, all these things were now going to bleed out to and have even a worse rippling effect. And that's where I drew the line and put a stop to the narcissist that I was dealing with.
You made a great point. You talked about punishment. Let's talk briefly about what some of those punishments can look like. And I know I briefly touched on them earlier when giving different examples of gaslighting, but punishment can be, and not left out, silent treatment, making you feel like there's nothing that you can do to please them. You know, the dinner's too hot, the dinner's too cold, the sheets don't smell good enough. What punishments have you experienced in your space, especially at the point that made you draw that line?
A lot of the punishment for me was creating conflict for me and around my children that was either completely conflict based on a situation completely made up or the other person's fault. Because in my situation, the narcissist also had an addiction. So that's another whole conversation that we would have to get into.
Yeah.
But there were either creating scenarios that didn't exist. You can't come over and visit the family because the last time you were here, the kids left a toy out. Punishment. Literally, there was a ridiculous argument over that one fact. Or you can't come over to the family home party, whatever, because the last time you were here, you left a glass out.
Wow.
So I can't come over because I left a glass out. And in that situation, it was ridiculous because I had done the narcissist's dishes, everyone's dishes, and the glass was a glass out. But little things that don't need to be an issue will become a big issue for the narcissist, will create it. Even if it's not a big issue, the narcissist will create it. And then you get it back into our things. Punishment, you can't come over. Your children can't come over.
Yeah.
You're going to have projecting. You leave a huge mess. The narcissist will leave a huge mess, but God forbid you leave one glass.
Oh, yeah.
Or don't clean up after your narcissist, right? And no accountability. You did this, but ignore anything I might have done because that's not your place. I have control and I will maintain control. And that's always what you're going to get from a narcissist.
That's not your place really stings. Dr. Ramani describes gaslighting as someone doubting your reality. She states that gaslighting is always about moving the goalposts, which essentially is what narcissists do. You never win with them. They'll set new rules, and every time you try to adjust to the new rules, you just can't win because there are no winners when you're dating and dealing with a narcissist, unfortunately.
No. The moment you call out a narcissist and they realize they can no longer gaslight, they can no longer use the same forms of punishment, they can no longer continue their behavior unnoticed, you are going to become enemy number one.
Absolutely.
And then goes back to the other conversation we were having. You're not going to just experience these things now from the narcissist. There is going to be other people that they aligned up against you that are going to start basically doing re-victimizing you. And because the narcissist usually will get to the person first, or get to the family first, or get to the boss first, or whatever, for some reason their opinion has more clout, and they set it up, right? You're going to hear this crazy stuff come out of so-and-so. And let me tell you why that's not true. Another thing that you touched on earlier, combining punishment and everything else, and this goes back to one of my experiences, and Dr. Ramani saying, don't bother with the screenshots. Don't bother with the recordings. In my case, I have audio recordings, video recordings, photos. It did not matter. Not to my family, and not because my narcissistic situation reached a courtroom, and it didn't matter there. The other thing that I noticed is anytime I presented a picture, time, date stamp, location stamp, everything, for one reason or another, it wasn't valid. But when the narcissist presented a video specifically, it was highly edited.
Wow.
To have the narcissist's perception.
Right.
And literally cut out before you could see the narcissist act up. And it was incredible because the narcissist, again, is the poor victim.
Right.
Well, you know what? I can't help it. My phone ran out. That was literally his thing. Like, I couldn't continue to record what she is saying occurred in this scenario because my phone died and I don't have it, when actually it was edited. Or another thing with there's no point in trying to track evidence is you're only going to hear one side of the story. whether it's your family,
Yep.
whether it's court or anyone else, there's really like no way that you're going to defend yourself to a narcissist.
Yeah.
Another thing that came up in court, my child was called disobedient, and my child was called out of control and unruly, and all like really presented in a light that does not reflect on him.
Okay.
And what was played in court was a video of my son, who at the time was 5, saying "F you" into the camera. He knew the narcissist was watching. And what was left out of court and the story was minutes before my son had watched the narcissist push me down the stairs.
Wow.
And my son was defending me.
Right.
That story never made it to the relatives' ears,
Right.
to the court's ears and things like that.
Yeah.
Dr. Ramani is absolutely right. There's no point in getting this evidence. There's no point in gathering information.
Yeah.
It's go. And which is a whole nother conversation. How do you ultimately deal with situations like this, whether it's work, a relationship, a marriage, even a parent, anything?
Yeah.
It's go. Once you realize there's this pattern here and you realize this is not okay, anyone you're going to look for help, family member, court, police, supervisors, time to go.
Yeah. When we come back, we'll talk about the best defense against defending yourself while in any narcissistic relationship when we return.
Celeste Mose, MsMedia, brought to you by Bandwagon Radio and the Orange Channel, where entertainment news, current events, and much more is corresponding for the masses. Not only can you hear her, you can watch this beauty weekly on Mondays with MsMedia.
Stay or go. Before we broke for commercial, Rupa made a really great point, and I was not going to stop you while you were talking. I was like, yes, that's perfect. When you're dealing with any difficult relationship and you've done the research and you've watched the videos and you've come to the realization, because if you're watching this episode, chances are you think that there's a possibility that someone you have a close relationship may possibly be narcissistic. There is something very important to keep in mind before we end today's episode. Narcissistic personality disorder and being a narcissist are two different things. What it takes to be coined and diagnosed, I should say, as someone with NPD is just that, a diagnosis. A narcissist is someone that if you've got about 6 or 7 of those different negative personality traits, a clinical psychologist would say, okay, yeah, they're narcissistic. But in order to diagnose someone as having narcissistic personality disorder, they would have to go into an office, have a conversation with someone who is licensed, and that rarely happens. So please do not take away from this episode that you have the right, the knowledge, the education, or the entitlement to go around telling people that they specifically have NPD. They may not. They may just be jerks. Rupa, what do you have to say about that before we wrap for today's episode?
I think it's, in my case, and I can't stress it enough, again, Dr. Ramani goes on and on about it, the only way to defend yourself is to respect yourself, and it's time to go. In my case, with the narcissist, I tried helping the narcissist with their addiction. Yeah. I made excuses for the narcissist's behavior, being like, this person isn't as spiteful as they sound or come across. They didn't mean it that way. I was on the other side of the narcissist's hate and agenda, and it turned. And I never thought it would turn on me. And when you go back and reflect on these relationships, you're like, whoa, this was always there.
Wow.
I was always making excuses for this person, or I was always trying to understand or not look at it in the worst light.
Yeah.
So again and again, it's going to come down to time to go. And when you go, you're going to be leaving a job.
Wow.
You're going to be leaving a home.
Yeah.
You're going to be leaving family members. And the point Dr. Ramani makes, and I think the point that actual people who realize that they've dealt with narcissistic abuse reach, it's nothing else is worth it.
Yeah.
Because the abuse has just crossed the line.
Wow.
And another thing that you said that I thought was very, very interesting, and I think it's very important, is people are like, oh, this person has narcissistic tendencies or whatever, but they're not as bad as Shia LaBeouf or whoever the narcissist person that you want to insert here.
Right.
Narcissism is like anything else. There is a spectrum, right? And that person's going to fall on a spectrum. We have no way of saying what the spectrum is, understanding it completely, or anything else. All I know is whatever spectrum it's on, respect yourself and reach. When you reach your limit, it's not going to matter if it's low on the spectrum or high on the spectrum.
Yeah.
You need to take care of yourself, your mental health, your emotional health, your financial health,
Yeah.
your sexual health, your children, your other relationships, your job. It's going to be enough.
Yeah.
And that's why you and I thought that these conversations to have on this platform are so important, because we want people to see that you matter.
Yep.
And when you think this is happening, go to these sites,
Yes.
go to the resources,
Yep.
and go to a counselor, get help, and honestly get out.
Rupa is being clear. Her opinion, you gotta go, right? You gotta go. Rupa's opinion is very clear. Get out of there. You've got to leave. The best defense against a narcissistic relationship, or while being in one, really is acceptance. The first point is accepting what you're in. You've got to acknowledge that this is not right. There's some toxicity here. If your relationship is causing you to type symptoms into Google as if you're trying to diagnose a cold, then there's an inclination right there. But once you start coming across the videos and you're reading books and you're watching other testimonials and videos and interviews and you're realizing, okay, I am in a very abusive relationship, you've got to accept it. That's the first thing, because you had not accepted it while in that relationship, which is why you continue to make excuses for both that person, yourself, why you stayed, why you can't go. You've got to accept it first. And then once you accept it is when you get to decide what I can do next. Because when you're in a romantic setting with someone, you can't always just leave if you've got money tied up, kids tied up, you've got businesses with them, real estate. A lot of people stay not because their hearts are still entwined, but because they just legally, it would be too hard to try and leave. And to Rupa's point, when you step into a courtroom with someone who is difficult and antagonistic outside of the courtroom, it's only going to go up from there. They're going to up the ante. So you've got to accept it, and then you've got to make the best decision about the best time and the best process. And we're going to talk through some ways to do that throughout the season series. Some of the topics that we'll be talking about, in fact, next week we'll be flying monkeys. We'll talk about deflection. We'll talk about projection. We're really going to dig as deeply as we possibly can before season 2 of Mondays with MsMedia closes, because not only did I promise this, but there is a need for it, Rupa. I mean, I think as a nation, and I dare to say it here on my own television show, for the past 4 years, we've been led by a narcissist. So I think as a whole, we've just kind of gotten really comfortable and really used to toxicity, and I say enough is enough.
And I have to make the point, I'm able to say go when I'm on the other side of it. When you have a job that you need, when the narcissist is a family member, when you've been told that you're the crazy one, you're the one with the inaccuracies, you're the one who's the problem, it is very difficult to just go, which is to the point of the interview you spoke about earlier. Stop. The victims need to not be asked anymore, what took you so long? why did you stay, and all this other things. We need to do what you said and turn back to the narcissist and look at what they're doing and how toxic that is, and also recognize the behavior in order to address it properly.
Yeah. I think it's something that you said throughout the show, which I really appreciate. You use the term accountability. It's really one of my favorite words. I think my number one word in life is reciprocity. Whatever you give me, I'm going to throw it right back at you, okay? But in wanting to be healthy, I refuse to throw toxicity back at someone, right? And so it's about accountability.
Absolutely. You will never, if you are not a narcissist, you will never be able to reach their level. Again, that's why it's pointless to try to take receipts, to do the recordings and the videos and everything else. You're never going to.
You can't think like that.
At that level.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
So it is a totally different situation. I literally couldn't keep up with the lies and the gaslighting and the strategy or the inconsistencies, or I never punishment, like that sort of punishment which would cause someone emotional problems or financial problems and things like that. Like punishment isn't something that non-toxic people, like it would never occur to me. Right. And so you are not on the same playing field when you are dealing with a narcissist, because that's how they always operate. Yeah. You're never going to be able to. And one of the other reasons that narcissists get away with what they do for so long is because it takes so long to catch up and to realize what's happening. Yeah. And I think that's another reason they're very successful, because you're like, no one would be that mean. No one would make up that many lies. Right. No one would go to the level that this person has gone, because you're like, I would never do that. Right. And that is when you see that cycle and repetitiveness, that you're going to realize, like, this isn't just a toxic relationship. You're dealing with someone who has a serious problem.
Agreed. Thank you for tuning in with me, Celeste Mose, MsMedia. Make sure you come back next week with both myself and Rupa Cunningham, where we will discuss flying monkeys. Until then, know this: your silence will not protect you. Audrey Lord, MsMedia.